Luawu Emiaku, Luawu Amen Rapata. Honors and reverence to the great ancestors who have come before us. Honors to those here with us, to those in the womb, and those who will soon be with us. I'm going to continue this reading of the dissertation. Chapter 2, the problem of authenticity. Rastafari conceptualizations of Haile Selassie I in academic discourse. There exists virtually no examination of Rastafari's perception of Haile Selassie I, utilizing a symbolic approach and bearing the objectives of this dissertation. There are, however, major works about Rastafari that attempt to delineate the concept of Haile Selassie I as one of, if not the unifying principle within Rastafari. These works we discuss below, comprising the second chapter of this dissertation, are necessary introductions to the ways in which researchers interpret the concept of Haile Selassie I. As each writer tries to not only define and categorize the varying nomenclature for and deified status of Selassie, but to judge the credibility of nomenclature and authenticity, deification. In this chapter, we closely explore the ways in which the major writers in the field of Rastafari academic discourse not only explain Rastafari's conceptualization of Haile Selassie as divine, but also the approach each writer situates her or his rationale that ultimately inauthenticates Rastafari thought. In keeping true to the writer's perspectives, the reader must note that in this literature review, each writer uses the term Rastafari theology instead of Rastafari thought. This is an important consideration, given that the etymology of theology is a Greek variation of theologia. The term initially refers to the study and knowledge of the Greek and Roman gods, but by 313 in the Common Era, the term increasingly became the monopoly of the Christian tradition. While the writers are valid in assessing Rastafari conceptions of Haile Selassie I as theology because of Rastafari's seemingly Christian influence, orientation, and nomenclature, I prefer to use the term thought. Although the contemporary usage of thought signifies the process of thinking or reasoning, the etymology of the term thought is Thoth, the Greek god Thoth. The Greek god Thoth, however, is the Greek reinterpretation of the Kemetic nature Tehuti, who signifies the wisdom of the divine. Using the term theology within their writings about Rastafari places Rastafari conceptualization within the Christian tradition, while using the term thought, on the other hand, may be understood as a connection to ancient Kemetic ways of knowing, descriptive of forces, creating and moving experience. In this way, we are open to examining the extent to which Rastafari are perceiving or remembering conceptions that predate the Christian tradition. Chanting Down Babylon, the Rastafari Reader, the award-winning text, Professors Nathaniel Murrell, William Spencer, and Adrian McFarlane. Edit anthologizes the most recent academic discussion concerning Rastafari. Spanned more than 460 pages, readers find foundational discourse exploring topics ranging in the scope from roots and historical impact to Bacowal to Hollywood, the Rasta Revolution through the arts, and concluding with an appendix informing readers about who is who in the Rasta Academy. A literature review in honor of Leonard Barrett. Academics and Rastafari aspirants to date are unable to find a more expansive academic intellectual treatment of Rastafari, and therefore this source clearly provides material for this review of previous research and intellectual contributions on the topic. One of the most sincere attempts within Chanting Down Babylon to explain the unifying principle in Rastafari theology is Eleanor Wint's Who is Haile Selassie? His Imperial Majesty in Rasta Voices. Senior lecturer in the Department of Sociology and Social Work at the University of the West Indies, Mona Campus, Wint proposes to disclose to her readers possible definitions for Haile Selassie I using interview data from among the Jamaican Nyabingi order. In exploring the definitions of Haile Selassie I from these prominent voices, she provides rationale and context for her major question about the conceptualizations of Haile Selassie I. She writes, Who is Haile Selassie I, His Imperial Majesty, is as important to Rastafari as the question, Who is Muhammad, to Islam, or who is Jesus Christ to Christianity. Comparing the significance of Selassie I with that of Jesus and Muhammad perforces that Haile Selassie I is indeed the glue within the Rastafari tradition. Yet Wint suggests that there is no unanimity on the biblical point of view relative to His Imperial Majesty. Extensive exegesis of the Torah, and New Testament proves for many of the Nyabingi that Haile Selassie I is the unquestioned, biblically prophesied soteriological king who they consistently refer to as either the wonderful counselor or the prophesied blessing of Israel. Other Nyabingi, according to Wint, conceptualize Haile Selassie I as the Iesus Christus, who came to earth to help humanity recover from its critical fall from grace. While these interpretations of Haile Selassie I do not necessarily indicate whether Rastafari view Haile Selassie I as God, Wint positions these responses in relation to both the messenger status of Muhammad within the Islamic tradition and the Son of God within the Judeo-Christian tradition. Therefore, the conceptualizations of Haile Selassie I among the Nyabingi are just as seemingly unique as the differences between Muhammad as prophet and Jesus Christ as the Son of God as they are gluonic. Wint's work attempts to resolve this problem of unanimity by interpreting Haile Selassie I as a Rastafari symbol for liberation in a Jamaican environment where colonial and neo-colonial leadership, specifically the Queen of England, limit Jamaicans' access to cultural, sustenance, and economic mobility. She writes that the Nyabingi look past the disappointment of a government that does not ease their condition to another greater earthly ruler who assures them God cares about them on earth and gives them hope to continue struggling for life and the mission of hope to proclaim to others. Regardless of whether Rastafari conceptualize Haile Selassie I as the prophesied blessing of Israel or as Jesus Christ's return, there is a consensus. The Nyabingi continue to suggest that he is a source of hope, inspiration, and guidance for their struggle for justice and equality, as well as for the liberation to share earth's goodness in a portion at least equal to that of others. For them, Selassie I is an important symbol of their struggle for equality and freedom on earth, regardless of categorization. Wint therefore concludes that the Nyabingi's unique conceptualizations of Selassie I as either the prophesied blessing of Israel or Jesus Christ's return become insignificant when viewing Selassie I as a symbol of their liberation. Although Wind's work presents the most pervasive views within the Nyabingi community and attempts to them synthesize them for the reader, she rationalizes the authenticity of Haile Selassie I by comparing his centrality within Rastafari thought to icons within Islamic and Judeo-Christian traditions. While these comparisons stress the importance of Haile Selassie I within Rastafari thought, it unfortunately suggests that Rastafari thought can only be understood in comparison to Western conceptualizations of the divine. While Wynne does not present Rastafari thought as a genealogical isolate, Wynne takes Rastafari thought is nonetheless taken out of cultural context and located within the very cultural context in which Rastafari thought seeks to challenge. I argue that understanding Rastafari thought from an African symbolic approach is useful for our further understanding and significance of Selassie I. For Reverend Clinton Chisholm, author of The Rasta Selassie Ethiopian Connections, chapter in the Chanting Down Babylon, the Rastafari Reader, Rastafari conceptualizations of Haile Selassie I, regardless of categorizations, are ahistorical and unsubstantiated at best. A modern Christian apologist and lecturer at the Caribbean Graduate School of Theology, Chisholm launches one of the most daunting yet necessary investigations concerning the validity of Rastafari conceptualizations of Haile Selassie I and the accuracy of Ethiopian historiography. I remember Chisholm. Chisholm was on, I think, Hard Talk with Muta Baruka, and they were speaking on Rastafari. I remember that. Sifting through the historical writings of Joseph E. Harris, Harold Marcus, Edward Ullendorf, and other prominent Ethiopian scholars or Ethiopian-focused scholars, Chisholm begs to discern what is unique about Selassie that he should be raised to divine status above all other emperors of Ethiopia. Chisholm's major contention is the extent to which there is a logical and historical correlation between the genealogy of Selassie I and his divinity as Rastafari theology proposes. Chisholm begins his work by interrogating the prized Kemetic, Glory of the Kings, the famed narrative documenting the genealogy of the Solomonic, Israeli, and Ethiopian kingship. Citing its main themes, he writes that circa or around between the late 13th and early 14th centuries, Yakuno Amlak, founder of the Ethiopian-based Solomonic dynasty, scribes this narrative. Chisholm notes, explaining the context of his interrogation, that Amlak asserts that the Ethiopian kings descend from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, and that their son Menelik I transfers the Jewish Ark of the Covenant to Ethiopia. Transfer of the Ten Commandments from Jerusalem to Ethiopia signals the transfer of the Solomonic leadership to Ethiopia as well, one that has been uninterrupted since that time, according to the Kebranigas. In essence, Amlak scribes this narrative, according to Chisholm, to document Ethiopian cultural and spiritual origins. Ultimately, it dictates heirs to the Ethiopian throne and solidifies an Ethiopian national consciousness that emerges in response to the genealogical claims. Citing critics of Ethiopian historiography, Chisholm suggests that Amlak's scribing of the narrative is probably political propaganda. Quoting David Phillips, Chisholm writes, "The Kebra Nigas was published seemingly to justify the claims of the Solomonid dynasty over against those of the Zagwe family or dynasty, which ruled Ethiopia for approximately 150 years, from the 12th to the late 13th century of the era. In this way, Chisholm believes that Amlak wrongly appropriates a cultural and spiritual tradition for the sole purpose of denouncing oppositional claims to access the northern Ethiopian territory. What better way to reclaim access to territory than through written claims of a spiritual genealogy with which to foster commitment to this genealogy, claims Chisholm. Chisholm suggests then that scrupulous examinations of the Kemetic saga concludes that there are several discrepancies between its narrative and the history written by Ethiopianist historians. Among the most important discrepancies for Chisholm are as follows. The Zagwe dynasty rules for approximately 150 years, from 12th to the late 13th dynasty, making continuation of a Solomonic lineage impossible. The Kebra Nagast explains that the Queen of Sheba is also the New Testament Ethiopian Candace, although they lived during different periods. The Queen of Sheba rules in Arabia and not in current geographical Ethiopia. There is also one other source besides 1 Kings and the Kebra Nagast, the alphabet of Ben Sira, that suggests that there was a relationship between Solomon and Queen Sheba and an offspring from the union. But in the alphabet of Ben Sira, Ebna Hakim, not Menelik I, was the offspring from this union. The historical evidence other than the Kebra Nagast for the transfer of the Ark of the Covenant from Jerusalem to Ethiopia is non-existent. Because of these discrepancies, writes Chisholm, Haile Selassie's descent from royal blood by way of Solomon cannot be proven conclusively. Nomenclature for Haile Selassie I is further inconclusive for Chisholm. King of kings, Lord of lords, conquering lion of the tribe of Judah, the elect of God, and the light of the world are all Rastafari Makonen's titles subsequent to his coronation as Haile Selassie I in 1930. Chisholm writes that with the exception of the Rastafari imposed title of Lord of Lords and the non-traditional title of the Light of the World, Haile Selassie I had no name or title that was unique to him. Even the title Ras, the name Tafari, were common in Ethiopia. It seems that genealogy, historiography, and nomenclature for Chisholm argue against any relationship between Haile Selassie I and the divine status. Summarizing this point, he writes, despite the somewhat shaky foundation of the Kebra Nagast support of Haile Selassie I's Solomonic claims, Rastas are able to accept this Solomonic lineage without question because they posit a messianic dimension to his bestowed titles that in turn substantiate the lineage claims they make about him. Looking to unearth further claims, Chisholm Looking to unearth further claims, Chisholm prioritizes Selassie I's awareness of his status as proof for denunciation of Rastafari's conceptualization of him as divine. Under the section header, Relation to Christianity and the EOC, Chisholm writes, how did Haile Selassie himself and the EOC, Ethiopian Orthodox Church, he championed regard the Rastafarian interpretation of the titles and belief in the divinity of the former emperor? Chisholm writes that Selassie's response to the above question is far from self-deifying. Instead, Selassie I is distressed by the thought that Rastas were worshipping him as God. For Chisholm, in order for Selassie I to be divine, he should be aware of his divinity, and Selassie I should have acknowledged himself as God. For Chisholm, Rastafari again are incorrect to find Selassie I as divine. The Ethiopian Tewahedo Church, also known as the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, EOC, shares Selassie I's sentiment concerning his divine status. For Chisholm, this proves to be one of the foremost challenges to Rastafari thought. Since the church's inception in 5th century before the Common Era, the Ethiopian Tewahedo Church believes that Christ is human, albeit a chosen human, who lived his life according to divine qualities. Contemporary Church Abuna, Father Priests, and officials hold firm to the belief that Jesus of Nazareth is the only human to achieve this divine, Christ-like state, and therefore Selassie I is not divine. Citing Abuna Yesags, the Ethiopian Church, an integrally African church, a source statement for the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, Chisholm quotes the Abuna stating that the emperor was not God to the Ethiopian people and other nations. He was a religious man who was elected king of Ethiopia. While one appreciates the respect, love, and devotion given to him as a clergyman, it is my duty to speak the truth and to strongly advise my brethren and sistren, young and old, to be aware of commandment of God. Thou shalt have no other gods before me, for I am a jealous God. Coming from the Abuna. What is meant here is that even if Selassie I and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church are consciously aware of the ahistorical, albeit unquestioned notions of a Solomonic lineage and the transferred Ark of the Covenant, all of which validates for Selassie I's imperial status, Selassie I Ethiopian Orthodox Church suggests that viewing Selassie I as God or the reincarnated Christ is simply blasphemous. For Chisholm, if the oldest Christian church confirms that Selassie I is neither God nor the return of Christ, Rastafari should not believe that he is divine for him. It is therefore implausible that Selassie I symbolizes anything other than a base level human existence, ordinary human existence. As Chisholm writes, Selassie I is in profession simply a Christian, a family man, and a politician, nothing more. Whether Rastafari conceptualized Selassie I as divine because of his lineage or nomenclature, his deification is unwarranted for Chisholm, as he ends his work with a complete reduction of the Rastafari's conceptualization of Selassie I to mere fabrication. Though Chisholm finds Rastafari's critique of the injustices in Babylon or European hegemonic culture to be useful, his sympathetic posture ends here. He concludes, the Rastafarian movement has leveled many necessary and commendable chances of indictment at Babylon over the years. As the movement continues its trek to Zion, it must examine the evidence undergirding its fundamental tenets, lest its attractive socio-cultural edifice begins to reveal the cracks that result from a faulty historical theological foundation. Chisholm. Both Wint and Chisholm's critical attempt at clarifying the conceptualizations of Haile Selassie I within Rastafari thought and unearthing its plausibility is echoed and extensively expanded upon by William Spencer, editor of Chancing Down Babylon, in his 1999 contribution to Rastafari Discourse, Dread Jesus. Far from a conspectus, Dread Jesus is the most comprehensive academic publication on Rastafari categorizations for nomenclature for Haile Selassie I. Spencer relies on over 20 years of multimedia research on Rastafari by way of reggae music, Rastafari literature, historical primary texts, and personal interviews with the foremost Rastafari thinkers. Professor of Theology in the Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, Boston Center for Urban Ministerial Education, Spencer is therefore well versed in global theological concerns in general and Rastafari theological concerns in particular. Aiming to provide himself and his readership with answers to several of the unresolved problematics within Who is Haile Selassie, His Imperial Majesty in Rasta Voices, and the Rasta Selassie Ethiopian Connection, Spencer explores the historical, albeit Christian, streams of thought that not only influence the origins of Rastafari's deification of Haile Selassie I, but those which encourages Rastafari to identify Christ as he who comes to liberate all of the oppressed, including the Rastafari, purposively proposing dread Jesus as metaphor, as universal symbol of human liberation, he writes. Rastafari's intriguing theologies places them within the context of Christinal doctrinal history. In pursuing the theological figure of Jesus Christ from its transformation into the Black Christ, into its appropriation in the fascinating Christologies of Rastafari, we may be able to glimpse what the contribution of Rastafarian theologies of Jesus Christ might mean for the future of Christianity as a global religion and an ethical way of life. His investigation concludes his investigation concludes that Rastafari must no longer dread Jesus Christ. Wind introduces us to at least two seemingly varying interpretations of Haile Selassie I among a Jamaican Nyabingi Rastafari community. Although she concludes that for the Nyabingi, Selassie I is either the prophesied king or the return of Christ. Wind, however, does not reach a conclusion concerning whether or not the Rastafari she interviewed believe Haile Selassie I is the incarnation of God on earth. In an attempt to decipher the conceptualizations of Selassie I more conclusively, Spencer expands upon Wind's interpretations and writes that Rastafari developed three theologies that explain his significance. According to the first theory, Selassie I is the return of Jesus Christ and the dispensation of the Judaic and Israelite God Jah or Jehovah. Selassie I is God, but not the reincarnation of Jesus in his kingly character, however within the second theology. The third theology, moreover, appears to place less emphasis on Haile Selassie I as manifestations of God on earth and views him as a divine messenger of sorts. We shall discuss the three theologies in detail below. Review Spencer's critique of the first two theologies and his applaud of the latter. Within the first theology, Haile Selassie I is not only the second coming of Christ in his kingly character, but he is also Jah the Father. Quoting reggae musician Ras Michael, Spencer writes that many Rastafari think that Jesus was revealed as the Son of Jah and demonstrated for us perfect sonship. Haile Selassie I comes as a king and perfectly represents the kingly qualities of Jah. So both aspects of the triune Godhead are represented by the same person from the same line of David. Rastafari adhering to this theology finds that Jah, Jesus and Selassie I are one and the same and represents the Holy Trinity. Spencer introduces his readership to the most seminal scriptures that inform this theology. Of the most central scriptures is Psalm 87, equating Ethiopian-born Haile Selassie I with God or Jesus. Psalm 87 reads, "His foundations are in the holy mountains. The Lord loveth the gates of Zion more than all the dwellings of Jacob." Or sometimes we used to say, "I God." "Glorious things are spoken of thee, O city of Jah, Selah. I will make mention of Rahab and Babylon to them that know me. Behold, Philistia and Tyre, Ethiopia, this man was born there. And of Zion it shall count, when he writeth of the people, that this man was born there, Selah. As well the singers as the players of instruments shall be there. All my springs are in thee." King James Version. Revelation 5 also suggests Haile Selassie I's lineage for Rastafari. According to Spencer, it reads, "And one of the elders saith unto me, Weep not, behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, hath prevailed to open the book and to loose the seal thereof." The seventh seal thereof. Rastafari reaffirmed their theology with these passages because they read Haile Selassie I as the one who emerges from the lineage of David, the root of the Solomonic lineage, to reign in Zion, Ethiopia. Selassie I must be the return of Christ if the Bible explains it. For Spencer, of course, Rastafari think that Selassie I is either Christ or God because Rastafari evaluate and reaffirm or alter biblical doctrine. Spencer suggests that Psalm 87 and Revelation 5 are actually speaking about Christ and not Haile Selassie I. The second theology reveals that many Rastafari denounce the Trinity we mentioned, supra-devaluing dread within their theology, in place of what Spencer views as a necessary Christ-centered orientation. Many Rastafari he interviews place Jah, not Christ, at the center of their theology, and conclude that Haile Selassie I cannot be the incarnation of the biblical Christ. For European enslavers and colonizers rely on blonde-haired, blue-eyed Christ as icon for the enslavement, racism, and cultural and economic oppression of African people. Rastafari, who adhere to this theology, therefore, assert that Europeans taught Africans to believe in Christ and wait for relief from racism and oppression in the far-off afterworld without seeking salvation and justice on earth. Haile Selassie, however, within this theology, comes as the incarnation of the Almighty. To redeem humanity from immediate injustices Africans suffer within Babylon or European hegemonic culture. He can encourage liberation within the material world, not through Jesus, and definitely not in Christ's heaven. Rastafari, who adhere to this second theology, literally dread Jesus. In spite of Rastafari's argument for the denunciation of Jesus Christ and centrality of Haile Selassie I, Spencer reminds his readership that Rastafari should retract their hostile position towards Jesus. He suggests that Rastafari should not dread Jesus, but in fact find comfort in the notion that Jesus is a dread. One who came to symbolize experiencing and overcoming oppression in the same way that Africans experience and can overcome oppression. Using one of the major themes of reggae singer Bob Marley's work to support his contention, Spencer reiterates that Marley's position is not to denounce Jesus, but the hypocrites who lie in the name of Jesus. For Bob Marley, the Jesus who was crucified on Calvary belonged to the dreadlocked oppressed, not the bald-headed oppressors. Spencer encourages contemporary Rastafari to read Jesus as symbol of one of the starving, the foreigner, the dispossessed, the ill, the inmate for the sake of righteousness, the victimized. Jesus is too a dread. Freeing Christ from being the icon of the oppressor is the only way to rectify the tensions between Rastafari theologies and Christianity, their source faith. He writes that the image of a dreadlocked two-thirds world Jesus, released himself from Western cultural captivity, can indeed be a reforming image of a wholesome change. Dread Jesus, writes Spencer, can only be a reforming image if it is not cut off as well from God's revealed truth that Almighty God came once and only once to earth to die for all people as a complete and living human being, Jesus Christ, Emmanuel, God with us, the true healer of the nations. According to Spencer, any other conclusion goes against God's truth written in the Torah and the Bible, because both texts reveal that Jesus Christ has already come for all humanity's sin. Other reasons influence Spencer's negation of these theologies. Of particular importance for Spencer is the extent to which early Rastafari leaders Joseph Hebert, Archibald Dunkley, and Leonard Howell began to develop varying theologies in 1930s Jamaica by altering the ancient writings, specifically the Torah and the New Testament. Indeed, for Spencer, it is clear that these early adherents and the contemporary Rastafari are unaware that they appropriate the seeming Hebraic usage of the biblical name Jah within their theologies and create nomenclature of Jah Rastafari for Haile Selassie I. According to Spencer, Jah is not even the complete, let alone the official designation of God, or Lord in the Hebrew tradition. He writes that, untrained in Hebrew, the preachers Hibbert, Dunkley, and Howell had no idea they were looking at a partial transliteration of the Tetragrammaton, the first two radicals in the common name of the Lord, normally translated the Lord, the four-letter Jehovah, partially transliterated to JH, Jah, in Psalm 98:4, were felt by rabbis to be too sacred to be pronounced in daily uses. Therefore, when the Masoretes added vowels points to the text, they substituted the vowel points for the word Lord, Adonai for whatever had been the original vowels. Although a pithy critique, Spencer writes that this is a major error on the part of Rastafari architects, who not only incorrectly suggest that Haile Selassie is God and or Jesus, but who interpret the JH or Jah as designations for God or Christ. This error is yet another reason for Spencer to question the authenticity of the foremost Rastafari theologies. Early Rastafari also misappropriate the racial cultural heritage of Jesus Christ that informed these theologies, as Hibbert, Dunkley, and Howell partially set the foundation for Rastafari to view God and or Jesus as African and phenotypically black. But similar to the way in which they misread the Torah, so too do they misread the racial, cultural heritage of Jesus Christ. The Torah explains aspects of the Hebrews' sacred cultural traditions into which Jesus is undoubtedly born. So Spencer indeed questions the extent to which these early Christian leaders could think that Jesus Christ is anything other than Hebrew in cultural origination and racial makeup. He supports his view with the latest racial anthropological research, as Spencer so purposively writes. Such findings should not come as a surprise to anyone. Whether blonde, brown, or black-haired, blue, brown, or black-eyed, Jesus of Nazareth was what the Bible claims he was, a first-century Semitic Jew. He looked like a first-century Semitic Jew, and speculations on the exact detail of his physical appearance are limited by the parameters of what first-century Semitic Jews looked like. An importation assertion is made here. What we can infer from the above quote is that if Jesus Christ is in fact Hebrew or Semitic, and the early and contemporary Rastafari consider that Selassie I came through the lineage of Jesus, Haile Selassie's divinity is therefore impossible. Haile Selassie I is a brown-skinned Ethiopian who is not even Hebrew in faith, but an Ethiopian Orthodox Christian who believes in the Hebrew Semitic Jesus Christ. For Spencer, contemporary Rastafari unfortunately inherit the perpetuate early Rastafari leaders' mistakes. Spencer proposes the ultimate critique when he suggests that the origination of the above theologies envelope yet another cultural appropriation. Joseph Nathaniel Hibbert, confers that Selassie is the reincarnation of Jesus, while Howell identifies Selassie as the direct reincarnation of God. Spencer writes that although Ethiopianist Christological discourse of David Walker, Robert Young, Martin Delaney, and Marcus Garvey influence these two streams of thought. The Hindu spiritual system brought to Jamaica by the Hindu indentured servants more directly influenced Hibbert and Howell than the Ethiopianist discourse. Quoting Hindu scholars Ajay and Laxmi Mansingh, we read in Spencer's work that the confusion about the exact status of Haile Selassie I, a God incarnate, or Jesus incarnate, reflects the depth of Hindu influence on the two concepts. Those with deeper knowledge of Hinduism and a more independent approach, Howell and others, regard Haile Selassie as the manifestation of God himself, more like Lord Rama. who is regarded by the Hindus as the first human manifestation of Lord Vishnu. Lord Vishnu and Buddha are regarded as the second and third incarnations of Vishnu. This concept refuses to share Haile Selassie I's divine soul with anyone. Last with Europeans, Christ. Indeed, Howell's followers are more Hindu in philosophy, rituals, and codes than Hebert's. Though Barry Chauvinist, who already denounces Mansing's perspective in his text Rastafari Roots and Ideology, which he publishes in 1994, Spencer, 5 years later, still relies on his argument for Hindu influence. His assertion to me in Spencer's this assertion to me is Spencer's ultimate critique of Rastafari's theologies, as he implies through use of the Mansing's research that early Rastafari leaders developed these theologies outside of any culturally African or black traditions other than that of dread. Rastafari theologies, therefore, are just mere appropriations of not only Hebrew but also Hindu thought. Spencer's third theology, a meta-theology, further renders the above theologies and their appropriations problematic. To be sure, it denounces Haile Selassie I as God or Jesus. This view has become more popular among Rastafari following Selassie I's reported death on August 28, 1975, shortly after his deposition by Mengistu's Marxist regime, who blamed him for the famine and death of thousands of Ethiopians. Rastafari had to ask themselves, according to Spencer, how could God then die twice? Spencer informs his readership that Rastafari proposed several interpretations to reconcile their loss of Selassie I. They include that, while Haile Selassie inspired the development of Rastafari theologies, they relied on God and not Selassie I as their object of worship. Haile Selassie I symbolizes the power of the lion, an international symbol of the most ancient characteristic and the highest potential of the human spirit. As Jazz Spirit guided Jesus and Haile Selassie I, Jazz Spirit can enlighten and illuminate all beings. Both Jesus and Selassie I are regarded as prophets and or teachers, as both Selassie I and Christ have specific messages for humanity. Selassie I was a Christian who encouraged Rastafari to worship Christ, the true Savior. It is obvious that not all Rastafari who fall within this latter meta-theological category find Jesus as the focus of faith in exchange for Selassie I. But for Spencer, these more recent articulations are proof from Rastafari voices that Christ is central in their theology, not Selassie I. If many Rastafari decide that Selassie I is neither God nor the return of Jesus Christ, but some other form of enlightened human, teacher or prophet, then who else but biblical Christ can be the symbol of liberation for African or black people? Spencer's work obviously concludes then that Rastafari should correct its false theological conceptions and correct them by believing in Jesus Christ. The common theme threading through Spencer's work and the major Rastafari theological discourse above is the authenticity of Rastafari's conceptualizations of Haile Selassie I. Wynne's work allows for Selassie I to serve as an authentic symbol of liberation from oppression for the Nyabingi and provides readers with a fresh introduction to their theologies. But Chisholm and Spencer, both theologians of sorts, find nomenclature for and deification of Haile Selassie I within Rastafari theologies to be not only genealogically implausible, but more importantly, they find their theologies inorganic, ahistorical, unfounded, and of course, blasphemous. Conclusively, Rastafari theologies proved to be for Chisholm and Spencer streams of thought that Rastafari, in their search for liberation from oppression, contrive out of either faulty Ethiopian mythology or more ancient, authentic, pre-existing non-African traditions. By my summation about this review is that Rastafari thinkers and writers must seriously reconsider the particular lens and or approach through which to examine Rastafari thought, or fall victim to the same unauthenticating analysis. I do concede that Rastafari do rely on Christian nomenclature and narratives that they glean from biblical passages to identify the God of Ethiopia in the personage of Selassie I. As this literature review indicates, using the nomenclature of Jah, Babylon, and Zion, identification with God and Jesus Christ for some, and Rastafari's identification with the Israelites for others, clearly suggests that Christianity influences Rastafari thought. Though these influences are important and warrant necessary questioning, using Christianity as lens to understand Rastafari thought not only invalidates their thought, as the review of literature indicates, but possibly misses the ancient spiritual significance of their thought. These works in the review of literature contribute to Rastafari scholarship in general and definitely inspire considerable research interest. These works, however, definitely provide a clear epistemological path from which I must deviate. This dissertation begs to argue for the placement of Rastafari's conceptualization of Haile Selassie I within the context of Kemetic cosmology by employing an African symbolic approach. Using this approach, biblical source and written historical facts are not as important as reading Rastafari conceptualization of Haile Selassie I as a process of remembering ancient forces comprising existence. In many ways, then, these theologically based secondary academic sources, although extremely limited in number, undoubtedly inspire my interest in an African symbolic interpretation. The major contribution of this dissertation, then, may be that it challenges the Judeo-Christian academic approach of Rastafari's conceptualization of Haile Selassie I. Chapter 3 outlines the first step in our symbolic approach to rectify this situation. We shall now turn to the process of remembering in the ancient universe as method of identifying and explain our symbols. This was chapter 2. We'll be continuing chapter 3, Anunian Cosmology, Process of Remembering Within the Universe. So I will continue on chapter 3 tomorrow. I give thanks for tuning in. It was quite interesting. A lot of write-up from Chisholm and Spencer and Wint. That we Rastafari need to be real and ask these questions seriously and do some real introspection into what we believe and what we know and what we are willing to teach the children who will be coming and fight the struggle after we are gone to the other dimension. Thanks for tuning in. Uncle Jasineb, Duawu Nature, Natureru, Duawu Amun Raputa, Duawu Emyaku.